All right, so we're picking up the kidney with a quick review of the gross anatomy. Again, we have the fibrous capsule, which is our external shell, with the cortex. Okay, and again, you can see the arcuate artery and vein here very nicely between the cortex and the medulla. Okay, so all of this would be the medulla. And you can also see the cortical radiate arteries branching off of the arcuate artery and radiating into the cortex, which is where they get their name from. Okay, the pyramids, a whole bunch of those. Each pyramid has a minor calyx. Okay, and then the minor calyces lead to a major calyx. The major calyces lead to the renal pelvis, and then the renal pelvis leads to the ureter. Okay, here's probably a better major calyx up here. Okay, then we have the renal artery and the renal vein. Okay, now in this middle section, you can see the capsule again represented here with the dark color, and we can also see more detail of what's in the cortex and in the medulla. Okay, so let's start with the arcuate artery and vein, which should be at the border between the cortex and the medulla. And then we have our cortical radiate artery, and you can see that it looks like there's little grapes or berries hanging off of the cortical radiate artery. Those berries are actually representing, each one is representing a glomerulus, and the little stalk that's reaching over to it is the afferent arteriole. Okay, so blood's coming through the arcuate artery, then into the cortical radiate artery, through the afferent arteriole, and then into the glomerulus. Okay, and in the glomerulus, filtration will occur, okay, as we force water and small solutes through the filtration membrane and into the glomerular capsule. Okay, now as we move over to these kind of purplish structures here that are attached to the renal tubule are representing the renal corpuscle. Okay, so the renal corpuscle that wasn't on your sheet, but I know you've probably seen it as you've been reading and wondered what the heck that was all about. The renal corpuscle is where you have the glomerulus and the glomerular capsule together. Okay, so you can't really distinguish the two of them here. So this would be a renal corpuscle. Okay, and the renal corpuscle and its glomerular capsule catch the filtrate, and then the filtrate starts moving through the rest of the renal tubule. So it'll move through the proximal convoluted tubule, where we'll have a lot of reabsorption occur, sodium, water, other ions, glucose and amino acids. So very, very busy area, and we'll also have some secretion occurring here. And then we'll move into this U-shaped region, the loop of Henle. Okay, and in the descending limb of the loop of Henle, we have water reabsorption. In the ascending limb, we have sodium and chloride reabsorption, and a little bit of potassium too. Okay, and then we move to the distal convoluted tubule, and it's distal because it's further from the glomerulus, and this is the area that really only does a lot of reabsorption if hormones are present. Okay, so if we have aldosterone and ADH, then the distal convoluted tubule and what it's connected to here, the collecting duct, will become involved in reabsorption. Okay, over here we have an enlargement of the renal corpuscle, so you can see its parts. Here we have the afferent arteriole leading the blood in. The capillaries, which would be fenestrated, even though that's not really depicted here, are part of the glomerulus. You can see the podocytes of the visceral layer of the glomerular capsule covering the capillaries over here, and the endothelium of the capillary wall and the podocytes, specifically their foot processes with a basement membrane between, constitutes the filtration membrane. So blood comes into the glomerulus, filtrate is pushed through, the filtrate is caught in this space, which is the capsular space. Okay, and the outside wall of the capsular space is the parietal layer of the glomerular capsule. Okay, and here we have represented the proximal convoluted tubule. You can kind of see that there's microvilli here on the surface of these cells. Lots of surface area for all that reabsorption. Okay, and anything that's filtered is going to start through here, so we can reclaim anything we filtered that we really don't want to lose from our body. What doesn't get filtered leaves through the efferent arteriole, and the efferent arteriole connects to the peritubular capillary network. Okay, now let's go through some of these same structures on this model, so we can see a lot of them again here. Okay, so arcuate artery, arcuate vein, cortical radiate artery. Here's the afferent arterioles leading to the glomerulus, and you can see the glomerular capsule around it. Okay, so here's a renal corpuscle here. Yellow is the proximal convoluted tubule. The U is the loop of Henle. The white curvy part is the distal convoluted tubule. And then here's the collecting duct. Okay, and once we're far enough into the collecting duct, it's not filtrate anymore, it's urine. Okay, and that's going to be eliminated. Now over here, they give you a little bit more information on that peritubular capillary network. So arcuate artery, cortical radiate artery, afferent arteriole, bringing blood to the glomerulus, which is inside the renal corpuscle here. Okay, filtration happens. Whatever doesn't get filtered leaves through the efferent arteriole, and you can see the arteriole breaks up then into branches, and those branches wind around all the different parts of the renal tubule. Okay, so those capillaries that are wrapped around the parts of the tubule constitute the peritubular capillary network. And you can see they start out red, but they change to blue. So they're dropping off their oxygen, those erythrocytes that are in there, dropping off their oxygen on their way to the cortical radiate vein over here on the other side. Okay, and also as they're going through, they're picking up, the blood is picking up anything that is reabsorbed. So if we had a sodium ion that was filtered, it ended up in the proximal convoluted tubule, it's going to get reabsorbed, put in the blood, and then it's heading back in the venous system to the rest of the body. Okay, so that helps us maintain homeostasis. Okay, so I'm going to flip this around. And we have a little bit of enlargement here of a single nephron. Here's the glomerulus, afferent arteriole, efferent arteriole. The visceral layer of the glomerular capsule is kind of hard to see, but you can see the parietal very nicely. and you can see the start of the proximal convoluted tubule. So everything here that's yellow is supposed to be part of that. Okay, and then we come down to the loop of Henle. And we get to the distal convoluted tubule. You can really see how convoluted it is. And then the distal convoluted tubule would lead to the collecting duct, which they don't really show here. Now, in this depiction, they're giving you some cross-sectional anatomy of different areas of the renal tubule. So here is proximal convoluted tubule with all the microvilli, which we talked about to help us with reabsorption and secretion. Here's the thin part of the, or thin segment, I should say, of the loop of Henle with its simple squamous epithelium. Okay, and then for the distal convoluted tubule and the ascending or thicker portion of the loop of Henle, you can see we have simple cuboidal epithelium with fewer microvilli. And it really doesn't look like much as far as microvilli there at all. So proximal convoluted tubule, simple cuboidal, lots of microvilli. Distal convoluted tubule, thick loop of Henle, simple cuboidal, few microvilli. Thin segment of the loop of Henle, simple squamous epithelium. Okay, and last but not least, one more time, turn it. Here's a huge enlargement of the glomerulus and the glomerular capsule. So you can see the glomerular capillaries, and this material that's kind of spread over them is the visceral layer made up of the podocytes. Okay, so afferent arteriole, glomerulus with the visceral layer of the glomerular capsule, efferent arteriole, here's the parietal layer of the glomerular capsule, capsular space, and then here would be the proximal convoluted tubule. Again, lots of microvilli on these simple cuboidal epithelial cells. Up here, between the afferent and efferent arterioles, we have part of the ascending limb of the loop of Henle where that special set of chemoreceptors is located, and this is the macula densa. Okay, and this is what monitors the solute content in the filtrate to see if we need to make adjustments to how fast the filtrate is moving through. We can also see that structure on this model. Okay, and on this model, again, we have the afferent arteriole, glomerular capillaries, covered by the visceral layer of the glomerular capsule. Efferent arteriole here. Up here is that part of the loop of Henle, that ascending limb that we were looking at a few minutes ago, and where all these nuclei are really kind of look like they're crowded together, that's where the macula densa would be. Okay, so the macula densa is one of the intrinsic regulators of glomerular filtration rate, and it uses chemoreceptors to get information on what it needs to do as far as regulating GFR. What looks like this glob of adipose tissue here is representing the granular cells. Okay, and the granular cells have mechanoreceptors, and they use those mechanoreceptors, or how stretched they are based on the actual blood pressure in the afferent arteriole, to help them know whether they need to make changes associated with blood pressure, okay, and glomerular filtration rate. Okay, parietal layer, glomerular capsule, again, capsular space where the filtrate collects, proximal convoluted tubule, and the microvilli here represented in blue.